All right. Next we have Talia Baruch. All right, here you go, Talia.
All right, hi everyone. How's it going so far? Doing well? Okay, great. So my name is Talia, and I led international product management and growth strategies at LinkedIn, at SurveyMonkey. I'm co-founder of Global Sake. How many of you came to our former events? Few? Okay, great. So this is our fourth event. I'm founder of User, helping companies accelerate global growth, international product strategy. So, okay. So today I'm gonna focus more kind of on the big picture and then dive down a little bit. When we talk about global product strategy, so the way I see it is really local product strategy applied on a global scale. But as you know, each market has different regional, cultural criteria, factors that need to be integrated into the plan, into the strategy. And I think why a lot of companies struggle with international new market entry, and especially with new markets like Japan, China, Germany actually is also quite a difficult market. It's because the way they see their expansion strategy is very much from the perception of kind of US-centric. Okay, we've built a great product, we have a product market fit, product proof of concept. Now we want our international customers to understand our value proposition, therefore translation. Best case scenario, localization. But again, language treatments, translating the interface, translating some of the assets, having the international customer understand their product. This is part of the equation. This is table stakes and foundational. But a bigger part, which is harder to implement, is the opposite, right? It's actually having your product strategy, business strategy, understand your international customers within the ecosystem of their geo-environment. And so when we look at it, if you think about it from kind of three tiers, right? So first of all, new market entry strategy. Understand your market, understand the regions, identify the priority markets you would like to focus on. So target addressable segment, addressable market analysis, understand the competitive landscape, who are the players, the local strategic partnerships for APIs, for entry point. Do the due diligence both on the market readiness and then on the your company readiness in terms of the technology, platform infrastructure that's modular, flexible enough to iterate fast enough to respond to local market needs. So that's your sort of market strategy at the bottom here. After prioritizing your target markets, hopefully Japan is listed there. There comes the product strategy and really the product geo-fit, right? So how do we optimize for, first of all, discoverability, right? Engagement, conversion to paid. So when we talk about discoverability, is how do users even find your product? Once they've discovered you in the market, knowing that a new market is typically a later adopter, therefore a lower engager, therefore your brand awareness is not as prominent. Do they discover you through non-branded search, maybe through a reseller, or entry point from a local portal, right? And then the sign-up, the acquisition success metric is really based on quality new sign-ups. We don't want just empty sign-ups, so people who actually register, who sign up and show up, right? Engage new customers. And then once they've engaged, what is the engagement trigger for conversion to paid, right? What is that threshold for you? Different companies have different. At SurveyMonkey, it was the deploy of the second survey was our cliff for our conversion to paid subs. And then retention, right? Renewed subscription. What gets your international customer to actually renew the subscription, be your loyal advocate in the market? And then the last piece of the big strategy is really the positioning internally within the organization. How is international, and it's, international is a very horizontal effort across all functions. How is it positioned within the organization for impact? Right? That's always a hard one. So when you think about it, really, we live in an era a little bit of kind of US first, politically. And if you think about it from a user first perspective, and really see everything you kind of plan for and prioritize for in your product and your business plan, in terms of how your end customer in the international market experiences it. So if I'm your customer in Japan, do I know your product, right? How did I come about discovering it? In Japan, actually, 90% of corporations don't, actually use vendors, don't use the original merchants, right? For international, for multinational products. And so typically, most big multinational companies are discovered through, the end customer doesn't even know that it's them necessarily. They're discovered through a reseller or a local vendor, Rakuten or anything else. Once I've discovered you, can I use you? Okay, the interface is in Japanese, but there's search work, there's SEO, SEM work, there's recommendation system work. Have you standardized your data sets to trigger to engine the relevancy algorithms for recommendation systems? Autofill is very important, right? It's a mobile first country. When I type in, does autofill going to work in kanji or in hiragana, katakana? Once I've discovered you, it's functional in my country, in my language. Do I care about it, right? I mean, that's that kind of golden brand bond, which is really achieved through, especially in Japan, where referrals and local credit and local trust is extremely important. You really want to have that social validation, right? So how do you convert your customers to become your ambassadors in the country and to refer, to recommend, to write your social validation proof? It's very common in Japan actually to pay, when entering the new market, to pay credited prominent corporations within the country to write a testimonial about you, right? It's, again, for social validation proof. And from the product side, make it work, so make it discoverable and functional, right? Make it relevant to solve, again, if the proof of concept worked in domestic US market, what is your competitive edge? What is the local problem that you will be solving for in the market, right? And again, how do you establish that brand bond? So if you kind of see, again, the orientation is a little different, right? So how Western defines professional identity, this is sort of an exercise we did at LinkedIn, because establishing your professional identity is quite different in the West than in the East, the Far East. So from open sharing, definitely, putting all your credentials on your LinkedIn profile, and more risk, taking risks, taking intelligent risks, more kind of equalitarian, flat organization, and the focus is on the individual, right? But in the Eastern identity of professionalism, it's much more risk averse. In order to, it's much harder to establish that trust. And in order to do any sort of business and get engaged customers, you need to first and foremost establish trust and credibility. And so the process takes longer. It's actually, NPS scores in Japan are considered, it's very hard to get high NPS scores. It's typically 60, kind of averages at 60 points. But once you do get over that hurdle of trust and credibility, the purchasing power is the reward, the referral, becomes worthy. And again, much more hierarchical, honoring hierarchy, and much more corporate. So when I did a little experiment back in 2014, asking our Japanese LinkedIn customers, how do you define your professional identity? The response was the success of my company. Right? It was not really about my individual career path, even though, internal laddership made a lot of sense. And again, since the demographic is quite different, it's a much older age group, we were not tailoring for the younger sort of internship job seekers, like we did in emerging markets or in Southeast Asia. It was much more for career laddership, so internal growth within the company. So incorporating the regional and cultural factors, this is really, really important. I'll emphasize that over and over again, but how many of you are familiar with the Guanxi concept philosophy? Okay. So you can't really do business in Japan, in China, in several countries in Asia without really truly understanding Guanxi. So at the core of it, it's about establishing. Really, literally, it means relationships, connections, and at its core, it's all about kind of the invisible glue that connects people, and about. I like to see it as a sort of a Fibonacci quilt pattern, because it's the interconnectivity of all the pieces that come together. And when you think about it, it's really kind of that bond is about the inter-community networks and the interpersonal reciprocal relationships, that those two things, reciprocity and trust, that are really, really critical, two critical core keywords for Japan and for China and for other Asian countries to establish. It takes longer, but once you establish that, you get the trust. So I'll tell you a story about when I worked at LinkedIn. Japan was not our top strategy. It is today, and right after me, you'll hear about that from Yoshi. But when I led international there, we prioritized China, MENA actually, and India. So I'll give you a little example from what we did in China, because that very much applies to Japan as well. So we looked remember the regional and cultural factors. So I looked at the regional factors, demography, our targeted addressable segment, students and professionals in China were the younger 17 to 24 age cohort. So we knew we were optimizing for internship or entry-level first job, so job seekers. Single value proposition, since the market is mobile first, lightweight, mobile app, off-stack, again, designed for early job seekers. The second thing we did was, of course, APIs, integrations. Again, that helps us with discoverability and with engagement. So actually the WeChat integration in API, in address book import, in sign-up flow was the biggest click for us in new sign-ups in growth. But as you can see here, integration through the entire social signals with Weibo, Tencent QQ for shares, all the social signals and so on. So these were the regional factors, right? Now what about the cultural factors? Cultural factors, again, remember we talked about establishing reciprocal relationships and establishing trust, right? So reciprocal relationships, we came up with a campaign that consumers in China successfully invite to connect 3 new customers. They can participate in what we call the campaign of spring summer days, and LinkedIn would gift them with sports shoes. They have the opportunity to win sporting shoes and other sporting goods for sunny days. And the other piece to establish credit and credibility, 2 things. One of them was 2 features. One is creating the professional identity certification. This was the opportunity to actually upload your business card, work authority credentials, and so on. Within 3 days, we authorized your credible professional identity certification. And the second piece was through partnerships with Alibaba. Alibaba customers were able to post their credit score on Chitu. And then the last piece is, of course, the brand itself, which is something that most companies would not do. It was a bit of a cannibalism approach, but again, tapping to that cultural factor of not coming in as a foreign American company brand, but coming in humbly as a local brand, native look and feel experience. And we call it Chitu, that taps into ancient tradition in China. So what does it look like in Japan? Again, understanding the ecosystem environment. What does that look like? Who are your customers? Who would you be optimizing for? In Japan, the age cohort, like I said earlier, is older. The purchasing power, the highest in terms of volume purchasing, online purchasing, is women ages 40 to 49. And the highest purchasing value is consumers ages 50 to 69. So what does that mean for your business? Mobile first, a mobile site is really important to build versus, there's the native mobile app, but in addition, mobile sites as opposed to the website that provides more information but is lightweight. Understanding that your Japanese consumers would engage with you primarily on mobile. Having download the app during onboarding is critical, and most companies don't do that because again, they just translate the experience, and if it's not part of the experience in the English domestic, it's not going to transfer to Japan. And so proactively adding a download the app promo in onboarding is critical. In person, like I mentioned earlier, the interpersonal relations, digital marketing. Customers in Japan are not as habituated as they are here in the US or in the West to digital marketing, to display banner ads and so on. And in-person events like these, or corporate activities, or in-person meetings, really is how you close the deal. And through reseller partnerships, actually a lot of resellers would cover 80% of, they would organize the events and cover 80%, up to 80% of the event's expenses, and this is very common. Again, closing deals through events. Most multinational companies actually do that through their partners in Japan. Flawless localization, Robin talked about that. Japanese consumers they have high standards for quality, and you do have to fully localize your experience. We did some of that at LinkedIn. Again, it was not a prioritized market at that time, but we did do a Navi page that it was landing page tied to our help center, and that again has the clustered text for digestible digestion of the content, and is much more kind of guided experience with a lot of detail why they should use LinkedIn and what's the process for that. We tested at the time also adapting a homepage promo and changed of course in Japan business cards are a big deal, so we changed the creative to show business cards, and rather than, and kind of emphasize the value proposition, right? So save your time to manage your contacts for business cards versus the global English message that would quickly grow your professional network. So that had a 127% lift in invites. And lastly, again, I'm going to repeat the emphasis in Japan on trust and transparency and credibility. You cannot enter the market with kind of spoon-feeding the consumers with your product plan. without it being adapted, transcreated for new market, for that market adoption. And a lot of patience to win that market, kind of as if, you know, kind of see it a little bit as handling your child through a lot of care and patience. So that's it from me. Today we kind of buzzed through it. Any quick questions?
Yes. We can do one question.
All right, and so I'll pass it on to Yoshi.